On today's Locked On Jayhawks, KU basketball number one in the preseason AP poll and our wing position preview.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thank you for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching each and every show. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Also find us on YouTube where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of LOJ, we're getting to our Wings preview. We're going to touch a little bit on KU basketball being number one in the preseason and the AP poll. And KU Basketball Media Day was on Monday. Bill Self had a press conference, and we're going to touch on some of the interesting quotes that he had to say at the end of this episode, which is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. You can bet on Kansas to win the title at FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started today. Let's touch on KU being number one in the AP preseason poll before we get into this wing preview real quick. So the AP preseason poll is out, and Kansas is atop of the list for the second consecutive season. I don't know why, but this has been like a bad thing for Bill Self. Is it just weird, odd things that are happening? Is there something to the idea that, when Bill Self teams have been preseason number one, they've let it get to their head, or I don't know, maybe they've just been overrated. That I don't know. I don't know the reasoning behind this. Is it just crap luck that it's turned out this way? But since 2004, so basically this is in the Bill Self era, KU has now been the AP preseason number one team 5 times since 2004, all under Bill Self. And they have failed to make the second weekend in the previous 4. And that includes last season when they also failed to make the second weekend. And you look back at all of these, you can explain a lot of them easily away. The first time that it happened, you just finished the team kind of on a downward spiral. But for the first, 23, I want to say, games of that season, like you were one of the best teams in the country. You look at the 2009 to 2010 season, like that team was great all season long. They just got picked off in the NCAA tournament. But like, that objectively was one of the best teams in the country. They got the number one overall seed in the NCAA tournament. You look at the team who went last year, and you could point to it and say, okay, well, they had some injuries that were kind of a part of it, right? Like, I mean, if Kevin McCullar stays healthy, whatever. Like the same thing with the 2018-2019 team. That one you could point to and say, well, if Udoka Azubuike stays healthy. So there is something weird about it that it hasn't worked for Kansas. But like that's the weirdest part about this is that for a majority of teams who are preseason number one, it's a great sign. I mean, makes sense, right? If you're picked to be preseason number one, you probably have a lot of preseason talent. You have a lot of returning players on your roster that season. And so when you look at the other teams since 2004, so that would make 15 other school seasons of a preseason number one team. 13 of those other 15 made it to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. That would be 87% of the other preseason number one. So KU's 0 for 4. The rest of the field is 13 for 15. And then when you look at making the Final Four, 47% of the other preseason AP number one teams, not named Kansas, made it to the Final Four. So basically a coin flip for preseason AP number one teams, whether they make the Final Four or not. Those are really good odds. But for Kansas, they haven't even made the second weekend. So does that tell you that there's something wrong going on here, that they've been overrated in some of these years, that I don't know, that it's just crap luck, whatever it is? If it is a bad luck thing, reversion to the mean is going to be pretty good. That means the next couple times the KU is preseason number one, they should be due for a deep run in the NCAA tournament based on what other teams have done in that position. Said that last year, though, too. And it didn't work out. But feels like this team is a little bit better positioned. So maybe they join the likes of those other teams who did really well in being AP preseason number one. Let's get to those Wings preview, who is going to make a part of this, of trying to fill out that number one, which, by the way, is interesting because KenPom came out today, too. Kansas only number 6 in KenPom. I say only. That's still really good. But what I do find interesting in KenPom and Torvik, Kansas is 6th in KenPom, 4th in Torvik, which, to be clear, if I was voting on the poll, I think Kansas is one of the best teams in the country. I wouldn't have them number one. But I do think the 4 and 6 are probably more indicative of the range I would have them in. But I think it's funny. They are third in the Big 12 in both Ken Palm and Bar Torvik. Iowa State and Houston is ranked higher than them in both of those metric sites. Anyway, the players is part of this wing group for KU. Let's start with Rylan Griffen. He is the transfer from Alabama. He had 33 starts a season ago for a Final Four Alabama team. He played in 73 games over 2 seasons with the Crimson Tide, scored 620 points. And last season, he shot 39% from 3 on 189 attempts. So high volume from 3. He was shooting them from deep. When you look at his biggest strengths, it's 3-point shooting in a variety of ways. He can get them off in a myriad of different ways. He can shoot them from deep. And I think defensive potential. I think he's a pretty good on-ball defender. You look at the synergy numbers. They liked him as a freshman. They didn't like him as a sophomore. But then you have certain games like the one that everybody likes to point to, the Sweet 16 game where he helped slow down RJ Davis, the stud point guard for North Carolina, as the primary on-ball defender. I think he's better on-ball than an off-ball defender, and so that'll be something he has to work with this year at KU, but he does at least have defensive potential there, even if it won't be fully actualized this season. Now, the biggest questions, what does that defense look like? What does the off-ball defense look like? And what does the shot selection look like? You know, it's easy when you're playing in the NATO system where he very much wants you to shoot all these threes and shoot quick fire shots and play quickly. And it's not that Bill Self doesn't want to get up and down and you know, run tempo and all this sort of stuff, but there's a little bit tighter than the NATO system of the shot selection that is asked of you. So if you come in, especially if you're coming off the bench and you give up an assignment, a guy backdoor cuts you because you weren't playing great off-ball defense, and then all of a sudden you go down the other end and you shoot a contested 3 early in the shot clock instead of working into the offense, Bill Self's going to put you on the bench. So that kind of becomes the big question there. But very talented kid and obviously adds a lot of three-point shooting and scoring when this team needs those things. AJ Storr is another part of this wing group. I think with Griffen, you can view him as a 2 and a 3. I guess he could maybe play the 4 given this team's lack of options as kind of true 4-men. Storr is probably more of like a 3-4 type if Griffen's a 2 through 4. 17 starts for AJ Storr's freshman year at St. John's, then 36 starts at Wisconsin, where he went for almost 17 points per game. And for his career, he has 43, 35, 79 shooting splits. So you look at the 3-point shooting, that's above average. You look at field goal shooting, that's about average. You look at the free throw shooting, that's solid. Good. Biggest strengths, power athlete. You know, he's strong. He can rise above the rim, getting downhill, scoring once he gets downhill. Got a little bit of a mid-range game to him. Overall craftiness, and I think just ability to be a bucket. Like, there is value in that when you are one of the primary scorers because the best defender is going to be on you or the attention is going to be put on you on his defense. Can you still find a way to get a bucket? Even if it's not always, you know, the most efficient game, somebody has to get those buckets in the tough situations. Kansas didn't have enough of that last year. They had more of it 2 years ago with Jalen Wilson. And there were games where Jalen Wilson, you look up at the field goals and maybe he was 6 of 20 and some fans would complain about it, but it's like you see last year. Well, when you don't have that, what's the alternative? Then the rest of the team are missing those shots because you don't have somebody who can be a grinder. And I think that's what he can do a little bit. Not that it's always going to be 6 of 20. Obviously, there will be some efficient games, but ability to be a bucket. It's important to have those guys. Biggest questions here, the defense, the rebounding, the buy-in, I guess, just overall, like this is a player who has all the athleticism, the power, the strength, the size in the world to be good at defense and rebounding the basketball. And if he does well at both those things, we already know he can score the basketball. That will raise his draft status. That will raise his likelihood of playing more minutes for Bill Self. That will make him the most impactful player he can possibly be. And so those kind of become the big questions that could separate him from being, you know, first-round draft pick type guy to being just a good scorer at the college game. Then Jamari McDowell, I could have put him in the guard conversation. I put him on the wing here. 31 games played, limited minutes last season. I think in theory, biggest strengths, 3 and D. The biggest questions, how good is he at those things? Obviously, he's still looking to gain weight. Only 28% from 3 a season ago, but he might be a redshirt candidate. We'll get to more of that coming up in a little here. And then Rakease Passmore, who is a senior in high school, averaged 19 points, 5.5 rebounds per game, 35% from 3. His biggest strengths, athleticism, scoring potential, I guess just potential overall. But the biggest questions, how much do things translate in year one as a freshman? Because if he's going to come in and he's a 28% three-point shooter as a freshman, which to be like, That does happen for guys. Sometimes it takes a couple of years to hone in the three-point shot. Then all of a sudden it's a little bit tougher to kind of play on the wing next to Dajuan and KJ and Hunter and some of these guys. How much does his game, how much does his shooting kind of translate in year one? And is he able to usurp some veteran players in the rotation? Let's get to where things project to be out, though, in those roles, as well as some interesting quotes from KU Media Day on Locked On Jayhawks. Our episode is brought to you by Roy. And time for our Roy Player of the Week. The Roy app lets you directly support your favorite athletes. Unlike collectives where you make a donation to a general fund, Roy lets you choose the specific athletes you want to support. You back the players you care about, and in return, get exclusive content after the season, like personal videos and updates. And the best part, it's risk-free. If the athlete transfers or doesn't create the content, you get your money back. This week, I've chosen Cornell Wheeler. And KU didn't have a game last week, so why are we choosing Cornell Wheeler? Well, I think we've seen and had more time to digest, and we're going to talk about this in our KU Houston preview later this week, the fact that KU's defense has been much better when Cornell Wheeler has been on the field. I just contributed $100 to his campaign on Roy, and you can come join me by making a payment as little as $10. When enough of us contribute, it's not just about the dollars, it's about the message we send to Cornell Wheeler together. Our collective support helps him feel connected to our school. Plus, Roy is doing their part to bring fans closer to their schools and athletes with all the exciting giveaway. Roy has given one lucky fan 2 tickets to any game of their choice in November. Here's how to enter. Just download Roy in the App Store or Google Play Store. Use code LOCKEDON when signing up, and you're entered. Already on Roy? Make a payment to any athlete's campaign, and you'll also be automatically entered. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Go to joinroy.com for official rules. Download Roy today and try it out. There's no subscription, no recurring fees. For as little as $10, you can get in the NIL game. Roy, support the players, change the game. All right, thanks for joining us on Locked On Jayhawks. What is the projected roles for KU's wing players? So as far as the starters, AJ Storr fits this bucket. I know Bill Self hasn't really given that away yet, but I still feel like that is going to be the case, that AJ Storr will be a starter on this team. It is possible maybe that Rylan Griffen ends up winning that job. Or it's possible that Rylan Griffen and AJ Storr both start, and Zeke Mayo were to come off the bench, even though we've continued to be on the Zeke Mayo starting train here over the last, month or so. So right now I have Rylan Griffen as a role off the bench. And then as far as spot minutes, I have Rakease Passmore. Now, could Rakease Passmore find more worth? What if he comes in and shoots 34% from three and he's a really good athlete and is defending well as a freshman? Then, yeah, he's probably going to be more of a mainstay in the rotation. He could get 10, 15 minutes a game, right? Maybe, who knows? What if he just breaks out and looks like, this stud freshman like we saw with Jamari McDowell a season ago? So right now I have him spot minutes. And then as far as future piece, I did include Passmore in this too, in addition to the spot minutes. And then Jamari McDowell. There's a quote we'll get to the rest of these quotes, but there was a comment from Bill Self at Media Day talking about the idea of he sees somebody redshirting on this team because of all the depth and options they have. Feels like Jamari McDowell would be that guy, which I think would be good for kind of everybody involved. So the bottom line here, is this position group better, worse, or the same to where it was a season ago? So last year, this is a tough position group to evaluate because of the injuries, right? When you had a healthy Kevin McCullar, he was an All-American candidate. I would argue he was KU's best player when he was healthy. You had Johnny Furphy, who, had some flaws, but had a lot of great things he could do as a true freshman and ended up being a top 40 pick in the NBA draft. And then you had Jamari McDowell. Not a lot of depth there. I guess if you wanted to include Nick Timberlake, you could. We included him in the guards, but you could if you wanted to. So in an ideal world, I think AJ Storr this year gives you that All-American, All-Big 12 level punch that you lost with Kevin McCullar. I think Rylan Griffen gives you the shooting, but a more experienced, consistent level version of Johnny Furphy. And then you still have McDowell, even if he redshirts, and then plus Rakease Passmore. I think comparatively, you would say that, okay, last year's KU group was injured, though. And so realistically, you're basically saying if you get a full season of AJ Storr versus, I guess, like a half season of Kevin McCullar that didn't include the most important part of the season, the NCAA tournament, the Big 12 tournament, the postseason, you're taking this season of AJ Storr if you get that fully healthy season, right? for a per game basis, maybe you take Kevin, but for the totality, if you can have a healthy AJ Storr, you probably take him there. And again, I would take this year's Rylan Griffen over a freshman year Johnny Furphy. Even if Furphy has higher potential, I think the guy more ready to play college basketball right now would be this year's Rylan Griffen. So if you were comparing it to a healthy version last year when they had a fully healthy Furphy and Kevin McCullar maybe in like early January, I might lean toward last year's because maybe more two-way potential because of having Kevin McCullar and having that NBA draft prospect potential with Johnny Furphy, but it wasn't healthy. And that is part of the evaluation. And so on paper, it's a lot easier to pick this year's team. But if this year's team ends up getting beat up too, then it just kind of depends which guys are beat up about where that kind of falls and how well are AJ Storr and Rylan Griffen translating to the defensive end, to rebounding, and some of those little things. All right, let's finish up KU Media Day quotes of note. This is Locked On Jayhawks. We're brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Did you know you can get Kansas 10-1 to win the national title at FanDuel? You can also bet on KU football this upcoming weekend, -6.5 against Houston going down in Arrowhead. And when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place all your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That is at FanDuel.com, the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, finishing things up here on Locked On Jayhawks, some interesting KU Media Day quotes of note from Bill Self. That was on Monday. Let's start with this one on Zeke Mayo. So there have been a lot of compliments lately to Zeke Mayo from Bill Self. And today, or I guess yesterday, if you're listening to this on Tuesday, Bill Self kind of went the other way. He said that he, paraphrasing on this part, but he hasn't been as good as he was for a little bit there. I think there's a couple reasons he would say that. One, I mean, there could be a little bit of truth to it. But two, he's probably going, oh no, I hyped this up too much. I need to reel it back in. And or I maybe hyped him up too much. I need to reel him back in, or I need to give him more goals, more things to work for, right? There more motivation, right? There could be a lot of reasons you would say that. But then he also went on to say something very complimentary of Zeke Mayo. He said, if you don't really know the game, you might not really notice. And he kind of explained it as like, he makes winning plays without having the stat necessarily. So like that could be a hockey assist, meaning he had the pass before the assist, right? That set it all up. His spacing of knowing where to be at the right time on the opposite side of the court or the same side of the court is going to get somebody else open, like maybe keep Hunter open or keep him from being double teamed down low, right? Knowing when to cut, knowing when to do this or that. He just makes a lot of little winning plays. And so as much as Bill Self, you look at that first part, I think it was just trying to give him more motivation and things, trying to reel in a little bit here or there. I look at that second quote and say, yeah, okay. He's doing little things to make you win, and that makes him a Bill Self player. Next one was Self on Flory Badunga. He said that he gets better every day, and he has things you can't teach. So the things you can't teach, maybe we already kind of knew that stuff. Like he's a freak athlete. He has an insanely long wingspan. He has got a really high motor, all these sort of things. The getting better every day is the key one here because, as you're looking at a young freshman, and we've seen this a time or two before where KU brings in a highly regarded freshman, especially a freshman big man, and maybe they don't play as many minutes as you might have expected. Maybe they don't play as big of a role as you might have expected. Now, this year, that role is, the expectations of it are tempered down because you have Hunter Dickinson in front of him. So it's not like people are expecting Flory to play, 25, 30 minutes a night. So it already comes in with that built in. But it's good news because they're going to be asking him to play that big center role off the bench, and you need him to continue to improve as the season goes on. And especially if you want to do this next thing, because he mentioned, and this is a couple times we've heard this during the offseason, this one more poignantly, he would like to get Hunter Dickinson, Dajuan Harris, and KJ Adams all under 30 minutes per game. I think it's very doable for KJ. You can just play a lot of, AJ Storr, Rylan Griffen, whoever at the four. I think it's very doable for Hunter Dickinson, right? You can play Flory Badunga 12 minutes a game, or you can play Flory 8 minutes and Zach Clemens, 4, 5, 6, 7 minutes, whatever it is, to get him under. That you'll be able to have those options to do it there. Although it's easy for me to say that right now on paper. You get into the season, and then all of a sudden some of these players, struggle who are coming off the bench or make a couple mistakes, and it's just back to the old guy, especially in some of the big games. The Dajuan Harris one, I don't know. It's funny. They might actually have more viable options for that position when you look at David Coit and Shaquille Moore if he's healthy and Zeke Mayo can play there, to where you can say, yeah, it'd be easy to play Dajuan 28 minutes a night and just let him be this, have all the energy in the world to play really good defense. It would be easy to make that happen. I just view Bill Self as seeing Dajuan as being the guy he trusts so much to initiate the offense that, like, I'll believe it when I see it a bit. Now, I do think there is something to the idea that he's cognizant of this, to where I'm not expecting like 36 minutes a game for Dajuan. I think he's going to try to do this, but I do think when push comes to shove, the competitive mode in the back of Bill Self's brain is going to hit in one of those early games when they're playing a good team, and it's going to be like a 7-man rotation. And it's going to end up being more of those minutes. But it definitely does isolate the idea that, like, yes, if you are projecting minutes, I'm not going to go as far to project Dajuan for under 30 minutes per game, but I feel better about projecting him 30 or 32 than I would say 36. Bill Self also called Shaq Moore the best on-ball defender. He said he should be healthy by the first week of November. Again, this just kind of comes down to, like, how is that injury going to affect him missing the practices? Is he going to be able to catch up to speed? Because we know Bill Self, if you're the best on-ball defender on the team, he's going to give you playing time. And then I also want to add one KU football quote today, even though that wasn't KU basketball media day. Less of a direct quote, more about Lance Leipold saying that the bye week didn't really help with injuries as much as they hoped, and that Kobe Bryant is questionable. Cornell Wheeler is doubtful. So that's not great, because talked about earlier during the Roy Read, KU football's really struggled when Cornell Wheeler. I look back at this. We'll go over this in the KU Houston preview later this week, but KU football, the amount of rushing yards they've given up in the last 2 weeks without Cornell Wheeler is within like 30 yards rushing of the total rushing yards they give up in the first 4 games with Cornell Wheeler. So they're certainly missing him, and they will against the Houston team who likes to run the football. All right, we got to get to our big man preview for KU basketball later this week. We also will have a late night in the fog preview and that KU Houston preview, all to come. So make sure you subscribe to the show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page, where you can like and subscribe. We'll see you next time with LOJ.